Move along, we've got Mr. John Graham here. He is the Shadow Minister for Roads in New South Wales, and you, sir, shall remain seated and quiet, please.
That's right.
Oh, we've all got questions.
All the questions are from over here. No, fantastic. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for having me along today. I want to particularly recognise Mike's work on his podcast on the radio, on the road, and I really look forward to seeing where this goes over time. I am the Shadow Minister for Roads in New South Wales, but I'm also the Shadow Minister for Music, so it's a unique combination of my two interests at the moment. And I want to recognise how much Australian music you're playing already.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing how this develops. I'll recognise a couple of other people. Firstly, Rod, for your work, your enthusiasm and your really strong advocacy for the industry. It's just so clear. I caught up with Rod and the board last night. Thanks for making me really welcome last night. Michael McCormack, both for his local role here, but also the role he's played around the country. Look, Tony there was talking about a really tough moment during COVID where the people who are working the hardest up and down the East Coast were not welcome in a range of places up and down the East Coast, as you all know. And I really want to recognise someone who worked with you to tell that story and push back on that, and that's Glenn Sterle, who you all know really well. But I think the campaign that Glenn ran with you to talk about just respect, the sort of issues that Tony was talking about, was incredibly important, and it certainly had a real impact on me and my colleagues as we were thinking about managing that terrible period. So thanks for what you did.
Sorry, John, can you just put that up a little
Yeah, no worries.
a little bit shy on hearing you. Thanks, mate.
Thanks for what you did. Thanks for what you did during that those tough couple of years. But I particularly want to recognise the work that you've done with Glenn and the work he's done on those issues about basic respect for working people doing a job for the country, about rest stops, about safe driving. That's been so important over time. It is interesting. I finally want to recognise, even though he's not allowed a question, the Minister, Sam Farraway. I'm not supposed to say this, but I will anyway. But look, Sam is one of the best ministers in this government, is the truth of it. And you would have seen from the speech he gave before, he's really engaged in the detail on this argument, and many of the issues he raised, many of the issues like rest stops, like the workforce challenges, like the need for investment around the state and the need to do it better in our roads, they're the sort of issues that really both sides of politics have got to work on together. They're the sorts of issues that shouldn't really be part of a political backwards and forwards where we can manage that. And I think Sam's done a good job of being able to do that, and I certainly want to recognise the role he's played in his time in the job. It's not that we agree on everything, but as an opposition, we've tried to play a role where we can agree, and this was especially important during the COVID period. We will agree on those issues that are really fundamental to the economy, to the community, and I really see this set of issues, the issues that have been raised today, as in that bucket, just so important for the future of the country. It is interesting to have these. This was a hot topic last night. It's been a hot topic of late, but a long-term problem. And it is that rest stop issue, that parking issue, that need for drivers to really get off the road. I'm really encouraged to see just the campaign that's going on at the moment. I think it's hugely important. I commit the opposition to really working with the industry to tackle those issues. I think Sam's been clear, this isn't straightforward, but we have to do better. The message is really clear. I know it's been a problem for a long period of time, but I think you're doing very well putting the case at the moment, and we have to take a step forward in this area. I've been pleased to see the consultation that's rolling out on this. I'm pleased to see Rod involved in the consultation, and also Craig Forsyth. I think that's really important. You don't need my encouragement to have a say on that. I know you'll do that one way or the other, but it's a really crucial moment to try and drive that agenda forward. One of the views that's been put to me, and this is something we have to turn around, is on the east coast, Sydney is really the least friendly place for truckies up and down the east coast. If you think about the lack of parking, if you think about the tolls, the issues we've had with speed cameras, I'll come back to that, but just the lack of rest stops, you'd have to say, if you look up and down the east coast, we've got the least truckie friendly city. And that is something that we really need to work together on and try and turn that round. None of these things are simple. They will be complex. They're going to take time. But if we can work across politics, if we can work with the industry, it is possible to turn those things round. The first step is doing what you've done and really pressing the political system, making the case. And what I can say to you is the message is being heard. Now we've got to drive those. Now we've got to drive those changes. I do want to welcome the fact that there have been commitments at this election. Sam referred to the significant package which has been set out by the National Party. We'll also be releasing our policy shortly on what we'll be doing for regional roads. We've argued the case strongly, and look, anyone who's been on the roads, I don't need to tell you just how bad the damage is. We've argued the case that councils can't do this by themselves, and that is now being recognised. I do want to recognise the investment that's been committed, but we've also been unapologetic about drawing attention to the commitment that was made last time, the commitment that 15,000 kilometres in New South Wales would be taken off local councils, delivered to the state government to really lift the standard of our road network. And it's good, there are good commitments coming forward this time. We'll be doing the same. But the commitment that happened last time, 15,000 kilometres transferred, not a single one of those roads in regional areas has been lifted out of a council's hands and delivered safely into the state government's hands to really raise the standard of roads across New South Wales. So we've got to get the basics right first, and that these commitments are welcome, but the first thing we've got to do is really deliver on what's been agreed already. I'll touch on just a couple of other things. I'm the Shadow Roads Minister. Part of our team is Jenny Aitchison, the Shadow Minister for Regional Roads. Jenny will be here tonight, so I encourage you to chat to her. And she's up in Maitland. She spends a lot of time travelling around New South Wales, very focused on the regional road issues. I'll talk briefly about two other focuses of mine as I deal more with the urban road network. One of those is on tolls. We've really drawn attention to the fact that a lot of the focus at the moment in New South Wales has been on the toll roads, not the rest of the road network. Now, they're fantastic roads, but the rest of the road network is suffering from a lack of focus, less money, less energy, less commitment. And we will place that focus back on that rest of the road network rather than on simply expanding the toll road network in New South Wales. That's not a political choice, it's the recommendation of Infrastructure New South Wales, who says that should be the focus. We'll listen to that focus, but we'll also tackle directly the high and rising cost of tolls. We won't just do it for commuters. We'll also have a look at what we can do for truckies, for tradies, and you'll see some announcements in the days and weeks to come on that. So I can't go into detail, Mike, today, but I flagged that this is very much in focus for us, and we'll have something to say. And finally, I just want to touch on that speed camera issue, which has been pretty hot in New South Wales. This issue about warning signs for speed cameras, it's important that people drive the speed limit. No one knows that more than you, but one of our concerns has been to maintain community support for the camera program and for safe driving. And the fact that those warning signs were removed without anyone ever being asked about it was something we opposed from day one. It's good to see that the government has now, more than 2 years later, reversed that position, but it really has been just a blow to a common sense approach to dealing with the community and speeding. It gives you some idea of the sorts of issues we're trying to focus on as an opposition, working with the government to build our road network, just the bread and butter issues of tolls and speed cameras that are impacting on people's lives, especially on professional drivers' lives. That's the sort of focus that that we're driving as we come into the election period. But I'm really grateful for being along tonight just to listen and learn. Certainly I got some very direct views last night at dinner, which was extremely welcome, and look forward to having a chat today over a cup of tea.
What I'd like to do now, because I know we're a little bit over time, Mike McCormack's here to address you, and I'd like to actually call on you now, sir, to come and say your piece.
Thank you, Mike, and given the fact that we're running over time, I might cut it down a bit. How about that? Awesome. Acknowledge Rod and his team and the work that they do to run your organisation. It takes a lot of work and effort and time and contribution to run organisations such as this, so thank you, Rod. Acknowledge my parliamentary colleague and friend Sam Farraway, who's doing an amazing job. He turns up, and to that end, when politicians turn up, I think you've got to give them a bit of a tick of approval. Glenn Sterle, where's Glenn? There he is, right behind me. Good-o. Glenn also turns up, and I know the work that he does in the Australian Senate, for and on behalf of truck drivers, for and on behalf of the transport industry, is very much appreciated. And I know when I was for 3.5 years, I call it the golden era of Australian politics, the Deputy Prime Minister and Transport Minister, I had a good ally in Glenn. He doesn't hold back. He does let you know what he thinks, but that's necessary. And I think we need more people like that serving in our parliaments. And to John, thank you too for turning up to Wagga Wagga. This is an important part of the freight network in Australia. And I know when I first became a Member of Parliament back in 2010, somebody at a conference very similar to this said to me that if you can get the Kapooka Bridge fixed, straightened, bypassed, whatever, you will have done your job. Doesn't matter whether you're in Parliament for 2 years or 12 years or however many years, but that is a bottleneck to the Australian freight industry. And that railway bridge there, that dog leg of a railway bridge, had been there since 1880, and the same configuration, and it was a complete bottleneck there just before the Olympic and Sturt highways, and we did fix it. 2016, June 14, it was opened. 27.5 million from the federal government, 27.5 million from the state government. I heard Sam Farraway talk about an 80-20 split there before. This was a 50-50 split, and but it doesn't matter what split it is, because the motorists don't know whether it's 80% federal or 20% state or 50-50. They don't care either. They just expect to get it done, and so does your industry. You just expect to get things done. And I was proud when I was the Deputy Prime Minister that we did contribute, indeed, $110 billion to infrastructure projects, many of which were actually in the road network. That second range crossing at Toowoomba, which meant that a truck driver could drive 140 kilometres without a traffic light set, without having to pull up. Laverton to Winton, the longest shortcut in Australia. Of course, I'm referring to the Outback Way. We pledged that we would seal that road. And indeed, when you look at other roads, the Port Wakefield extension, I could go on and on. But I must admit that you get a lot more things done when you do it in a bipartisan way. Now, I appreciate that John and Sam are both going head-to-head in the upcoming state election, and may the best team win. Of course, I was pleased to hear John talk about the Nationals. And indeed, we do have a big investment. We do have a large stake in regional New South Wales, in regional Australia, and I know Sam is proud of what he's done, and I'm very honoured to serve alongside him as a fellow National Party member. But again, people don't care whether it's National, Labor, Liberal, whatever, they just expect to get it done. But when I was the Deputy Prime Minister and of course that thing called COVID hit, the fact that we were able to get that National Freight Code wasn't perfect, but we were able to get that in place within a matter of hours, not days or weeks or months, meant that people could get their toilet rolls, and everybody expected to, be using 10 rolls of toilet paper every time they went to the toilet. It just became a phenomenon. I'm a folder, not a scruncher, just for the record, but it was unbelievable. We were getting supermarkets cleared out. And everybody was hoarding. But when people do that, the onus of responsibility on those goods being delivered comes down to you people, comes down to the industry. And the industry sometimes gets a bad rap. When you look at the accident rate or the crash rate, it's better to call it crash than accidents because they're not actually accidents, but when you look at the crash rate, in crashes involving a heavy vehicle, it's only about 10% of the time that it's probably the heavy vehicle driver's fault. 90% of the time, it's the other entity involved. And when I heard Tony Madden talking about the descriptive language being used on CVs and other devices, yes, but the trucking industry has come a long way from perhaps even, we'll say, the 70s. And the professionalism shown by truck drivers, by those people behind the wheel, is something to be proud of. One of the things I was disappointed about was the fact that when we were looking at labour shortages and getting people from overseas in, that we didn't probably push the truck drivers as one of those industries where it's a highly skilled industry. I mean, I defy anybody of those bureaucrats, and Glenn will probably back me up here, who were ticking and flicking those sorts of things and making sure they provided the list of skilled and some unskilled workforce shortages that we needed. I defy any of them to get in a truck and back a B-double into one of those very, very narrow supermarket places to get the groceries unloaded and then to get on to the next job. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it in a pink fit. And I commend the truck driving industry for what it does, for the safety it shows, for the professionalism it exudes always. But getting back onto that National Freight Code, it happened within hours because I had a good relationship with, at the time, 5 of 8 state and territory entities or administrations were actually Labor. And the fact that I had a good relationship with people such as Rita Safiotti in WA, Jacinta Allen in Victoria and Mark Bailey in Queensland, all Labor ministers, all good Labor ministers, who put the nation and the national interest ahead of any political interest. And we did that in freight. It's a shame we didn't do it in some other areas, but that's why truck drivers who were being held up for at least 40 minutes, if not an hour, over particularly the Queensland-New South Wales border, it then became 4 minutes. And so I thank those ministers again for their cooperation that they showed in the national interest. And working with them was a lot easier than butting heads with them, and particularly butting heads with them in a press conference sense. Because I think sometimes we have politicians who are far too inclined to try to just win a political point in a news conference than actually get things done for the people we serve. And the people we serve are you. The people we serve are those people who expect the freight industry to deliver their goods on time. So I say thank you for doing that. More work to be done, and I know that I had a meeting with the Infrastructure Minister Catherine King this week about what we can do in a bipartisan way and what we can do with the states to make sure that we can build some of those. I heard the fellow from Harden there mention the railway bridge, that sort of a bridge to nowhere. Those sorts of things should be fixed, and I agree wholeheartedly with Sam that that can come from Canberra, but there's also needs to be a willingness, of course, from Macquarie Street. We just need to get on and get things done. I know that certainly when it comes to regulation and red tape, that's always an issue. I know you're going to be hearing from Greg Casey a little bit later on from his experience as a highway patrol officer. These conferences are good places to start to bring about change. And it's not necessarily listening to somebody at the microphone and the podium where you're going to actually be able to affect that change. It's around the coffee urn and the water cooler and the dinner tonight where business cards. Make those meetings and then follow up, because that's where you can affect change. And be certain to continue to lobby us politicians, because we are there to serve you. I know you've got listening ears in Glenn and Sam and John, because it's in our best interest to make sure that your industry is its best self. So I thank you. I say welcome to Wagga Wagga. It is a wonderful city to have served for 12 years, but it's a wonderful area, and somebody mentioned earlier that it is one of the great food bowls of our nation. Indeed it is, but it also needs a great trucking sector, and one of the biggest difficulties I hear from local transport operators is the ability to get labour. And it doesn't matter whether it's the freight industry or what it is, right across the board, the labour shortage is something that we are going to have to address as oppositions, as governments at state and federal level, to make sure that we can get the right people in the right places doing the right thing for Australia. Thank you very much.
Most of them have all gone, but I had past, present and potentially future ministers in the room who I am accountable to. And it is important to just note that I am accountable to the ministers. I'm not an association, I'm a regulator. And it's a really important distinction that I think you guys understand, but can I say, I don't think the bureaucrats or governments do. I am a regulator, I'm not a lobbyist. I do just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. And as I said, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sal. I am the Chief Executive of the NHVR. And for the last 9 years, and I am going on to my 10th year anniversary, it has literally been a cat herding exercise, and I feel for you, and a lot of our pain are similar to the pains that you feel as well. I think you know who we are and what we do. We are well and truly on the journey of becoming that single regulator. I actually have people in the room today that I will introduce. So I have my Chief Operations Officer here, Mr. Paul Salvati, Bethany McGill and Scott Knowles, who are our stakeholder officers in New South Wales. And I do believe for the first time in this conference, you actually have uniformed officers here, and I have Peter and Chris. And I think that demonstrates to you the genuine commitment that we said we made to this industry, that we were going to be a different regulator. And when you interact with my people, you would interact with them not only on the side of the road, but also in forums like this, where you have the opportunity to come up and speak to them. Because I genuinely believe that if we do that, what Nola mentioned in her presentation and what you heard from some of the earlier politicians may actually start to be achieved. And I'm actually really pleased to say that one of your members came up to me this morning and said, you spoke to us last year in Toowoomba and said you were going to do X, Y, Z. And X, Y, Z was that you would educate, you would inform, and then you would enforce. And we actually probably thought you were speaking shit. And I'll call it as it is, because I think that's what you all thought. And it was amazing to hear from him, you actually have delivered on what you said you were going to do. And that's not me, that's a credit to my staff that are in the room, but that's a credit to allowing us to do what we said we were going to do. So I think I am doing what I've been asked to do, and I'm not talking about it. And hopefully you're seeing that, and hopefully you are seeing the benefit of a single entity, because I firmly believe we have made a difference. And I firmly believe that if we weren't here, I don't think you would be where you are as a sector, and I think a lot of your issues would be far worse than what they are now, because I am seeing a contraction from some of the government agencies to restrict and restrain rather than open up. But anyway, that's why I'm paid the big bucks, they reckon, to do this job. So we are a body, we're a body that wants to work, we're a body that's tasked. I implement legislation that's given to me. I don't agree with the legislation. I think it needs a massive level of reform, as Noel has picked up on. But we're moving on to 5 years before that legislation is going to hit the desk. And that's not sustainable in an economy or a country of this size if we're going to be competitive. We want to maintain a safety outcome and deliver on outcomes. 197 heavy vehicle incidences, fatalities last year, out of 150 odd something. The highest, I think, in nearly 10 years. And the numbers for the first 6 weeks of the year are already trending at around 26. So we're still killing too many people on the road. And yes, the interaction between light and heavy is normally the lights don't come off well, but we're still losing drivers, and that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable if we want to attract, it's not sustainable if we want our people to come home, but we all play a part in ensuring that we do it better. And I'm saying all. We play a role, but you as industry, you as individuals, you as trainers, you as operators, you as owners, all play a role. And the driver shortage, I don't think, is going to go away. And unfortunately, we might see more of Tony's situations, and that's not good for this country, because I think that'll put pressure on proper training, on everything else that we want. So if we're genuine, we all have to play our part. So I'm well and truly on my agenda and my commitment to deliver the reform agenda. New South Wales was transitioned last year. After I spoke to you in February, we transitioned New South Wales in August. I'm really pleased to say that that transition is going well. I have a fantastic group of officers now that have joined, that have embraced the approach that the regulator wishes to undertake around that educate, inform, and then take the appropriate actions. We're working on Queensland, and hopefully we should get Queensland over the line by the end of the year. That'll have been a 10-year journey to establish what ministers signed off in 2014, which was a single national regulator implementing 796 pages of crap. And sorry, it's the reality, because we all have to deal with that legislative framework. It is too complex. It is difficult. It doesn't make sense. It is not relevant of the current environment that you work in, the technology that you deal with, the vehicles, the standards, the processes. It is outdated, so we need to fix it. We know that. And I do believe that I will give you a consistent approach. I'm hoping we get a consistent set of new legislative frameworks, and Nola, I'm pleased to hear that you guys are driving that agenda, but we need to get onto it faster. And I know you appreciate that in your dual roles, but we need a sensible legislative reform, not a legislative reform that goes to the common lowest denominator, because we have a jurisdiction that doesn't want to budge, and that's where our ministers need to step above and tell the bureaucrats what's required, rather than the other way around. I'm hoping you're seeing that we are delivering on the things that we had said we would do. I think we are becoming more consistent in our approach. Our borderless operations does mean that my officers can interact a lot more closely with each other in the way they do things. We still share some of the frustrations that you do, particularly around access and what can be done. The road managers are the road managers. We understand that, but I would prefer probably a more open dialogue on the value that we bring to the table around the discussion on what we can do to simplify and make some of those access provisions a lot easier. As I've said, we're embarking on that approach. We are taking a risk-based approach to the way we do things. If you're doing a good job, keep doing it. Tell your mate how to do it. But if you're not, expect a visit. I think you would all expect that from me. You don't want to see your mates killed because someone hasn't done the right thing on the road. You've all told me that. So don't get the shits when I'm doing my job. Maybe congratulate us when we're doing our job. Let me know if I'm not doing it properly, because I think I've demonstrated that we're listening and we'll fix. But you know, my officers are human too. And they don't mind that you've done a good job today, mate. Thank you very much for telling me that there was an issue there. Instead of shit, here's another blister. Or maybe I'm making you get home safely. So we're putting a lot of time and effort in what we do in training, in educating our officers, and they're embracing that. And I've been on the road, and that interaction now is very much more like, hello, how are you, driver, today? How's it going? Yes, thank you very much. And that's the respect that needs to come back into this industry, because Tony, you are right, we hear those things on the radio. And I'm really concerned that I think there is going to be something serious happens on this network. We've lost the Australian culture of you're a mate and I'm going to help you. And that's not sustainable, and this industry won't be sustainable. And to some degree, what Tony said of the cause is probably something that we all need to deeply reflect, because I don't think there will be a sustainable transport sector that was the grassroots of everyone in this room, because it'll be big businesses driving that agenda. I've still got my job to do, but I want you as part of that job, because we like working with you. So we continue to drive that focus on safety. We really continue to drive on simplifying what we've got, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. And we won't walk away from the inform, educate, enforce and monitor, but expect us to come down quite hard where there are activities that aren't appropriate. And that's across the supply chain. I think what we've demonstrated to you over the last sort of 12 to 18 months is that we're moving away from driver. We're moving up the chain. Our prosecutional activities are up the chain. We are holding directors, we're holding executives to account. That's what you've asked us to do. I can't turn my eye off those who are on the road, but our focus is on the chain, and we will continue to do that. This one is a constant one, and we are listening. We are working closely with police. We're endeavouring to align as much as possible the way we implement the law with how they do that. And our interaction with the agencies continues to improve on a day-by-day basis, where we're sharing information, we're actually sharing joint operations, where their officers are actually watching my officers undertake their tasks. And that's a positive. This will take time. They are authorised. They are authorised under their own police powers. They're authorised under the HVNL. They implement state laws as well. But I am seeing a genuine, at least at senior levels, commitment to see more alignment, and that will be a good thing. I don't think they have the same, resources available to be doing all of the medial type activities, and if we can get clarity around what the role the regulator does to what police does, hopefully you'll see a better outcome in that space. But it is a constructive relationship, it is a constructive partnership. We're entering into MOUs, we're sharing data and information, so hopefully over time we can start to address a number of the issues that I've heard through these various forums. I do want to touch on some of the work that we have been doing in terms of fatigue. The view that the regulator took was that while the review of the law is underway, the reality is that even with a decision read at the end of the year before it goes through drafting and adoption, it's still probably another 2.5, potentially 3 years away. We felt that it was more important to actually try and work within the current frameworks. So we've actually started a broad program around how we actually make AFM more accessible. We believe AFM actually is a very viable tool to actually manage your fatigue requirements. It's tailored to the operators and the way they manage the individuals that work for them. We're looking at simplifying the approaches. We're looking at creating more tools to allow it to be much more user-friendly. We're codifying the process into the portal so it actually does a lot of the things that you need to do. So what we're doing is demystifying what has been notionally known as it's too hard to be an AFM, and I have to be a very big operator and I have to spend a lot of money to do that. We think you don't. We think we can provide you with the capabilities and the tool sets to give you what you need, which is ultimately the flexibility to work within the framework that keeps you safe when you need to. And from our experience, that most of the operators who are in AFM never use the provisions of the outer limits. They actually work within it. It's a just in case I need it. And for us, that's fine, because we then know that you're putting the appropriate measures, the training and effort into keeping your businesses safe. We have been engaging with industry. We're going to go back out to industry with some of the work we're doing in that, and we'll be keen to understand your feedback in that regards. As I said, there's the more transparency that we would like to do. It's really then about tailoring some of those options and then being able to pull that down. So over the coming year, you should see more in this space. It will reduce that complexity, the duplication, but engage you as operators more closely in being able to provide your drivers with the tool sets that they need. I love coming to this conference because you are the most vocal advocates of the adoption of electronic work diaries. I don't need to say anything more, you're doing it for me. You've seen the benefit that systems or those systems provide you in terms of removing those administrative blisters that you continually tell me about. What I'm pleased to say is that we've now got, I think, 9 approved systems on the market. At the end of last year, we approved our first AFM in an EWD. So there's now no boundaries in terms of what adoption of the electronic systems are. You've heard me say it before. I don't make the rules, but you've heard me say it before. I think these should be mandatory. These remove all the issues that you guys grapple with on a day-to-day basis. It levels the playing field. Yes, I get your comment that maybe there's the 1 minute, but I don't believe any of my officers have infringed anyone who's got an EWD for a minute. And we need to work through that, and that's the legislative framework. So EWDs, I think, are a good tool. It's a tool. It doesn't manage fatigue. It counts time in an electronic format that stops those miscalculations or those errors in a book that result in a $600 figure. Fatigue is managed to a whole lot of other things, whether that's technology, systems or processes. This is one of the tools. It's a tool that we've provided to help make your jobs and lives easier. So for us, the next 12 months, as I said, we're going to continue that work to really get that stronger relationship with the policing agencies, to get that commonality and approach. We have heard industry, we hear it loud and clear. We're going to continue with that focus on safety on our roads. We don't want to see 197 Australians killed. No one does. We need to have more focus on trending that figure down and working more closely. We will deliver on those fatigue outcomes to make it simpler. I'm hoping there will be a larger uptake of electronic work diaries. And then the icing on the cake is hopefully we'll get Queensland over the line and we will be truly a borderless regulator. And then I'm going to go have a chat to Glenn. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Greg Casey, former Highway Patrol officer, now retired, so he can actually speak his mind. Thanks, mate.
The opportunity to speak to you today came about a few months ago when I was having a chat on the phone with Rod Hannafy. And during that conversation, my relatively recent retirement from the police came up. And I mentioned to Rod that one of the things that I missed the most since I retired was my interactions with truck drivers. But I meant that in a very positive way. And Rod told me he thought that was a very interesting thing for an ex-Highway Patrol cop to say. And shortly after asked me if I'd be happy to come and speak to you today, and obviously I jumped at the chance. So what I hope to do today is give you a perspective of the Highway Patrol from the perspective of a Highway Patrol officer. But one thing I won't do is stand here and blindly defend the Highway Patrol. They're a cohort comprised of all different types of people from all different backgrounds and with different levels of experience, knowledge and different motivations and priorities. And I readily admit that there are many occasions when individual Highway Patrol officers could have handled things differently. And Nola, I acknowledge what you said before, certainly do. But as a supervising sergeant for the last 13 years of my policing career, I constantly offered guidance to my subordinate staff. But I was only one, and I can't stand here and offer a critical appraisal of the hundreds of decisions made by enforcement officers all across the state on a daily basis. All I can do is tell my story and offer my motivations for taking the approach that I did. Overwhelmingly, my interactions with truck drivers were positive. In contrast, many car drivers think they're perfect and willingly offer their advice on how the Highway Patrol should do their job. I once sat in on a lecture by a prominent road safety expert who commented that when he entered the road safety world, he was so pleased to have so many other experts to give him advice about how to do his job. When I received this kind of advice, it was usually during a car traffic stop. Invariably, I was told that my focus should be on something other than what that person had been stopped for. If they were stopped for speeding, then apparently the focus should have been on mobile phones. If they were stopped for them on their mobile phones, the focus should have been on speeding. And then, of course, there was always the old chestnut, why aren't you out catching murderers? Well, I always offered to go out and catch the murderer if they could point the homicidal maniac out to me, but ironically, no one ever could. The point being that in most cases, car drivers were generally looking for an excuse or simply denying that they'd done what I'd just seen them do. And in the latter half of my career, that meant that I'd also caught them on video. But with truck drivers, most of the time, there was an acknowledgement of what they'd done. If I stopped the truck driver for speeding, there was rarely ever any argument, and this was generally the case for any other kind of driving infringement. With truck drivers, there was rarely any argument or pushback, just an acknowledgement of their actions. And the important thing here is that this opens the door to a conversation about how to avoid these things in the future. Frequently, I had the satisfaction of getting a thank you handshake from a truck driver who I just spent time with, explaining how to restrain a load so that it complied, or issuing a defect notice for a range of issues on the truck that, to that point, the boss had refused to fix. I even had thank yous from truck drivers who I'd grounded for 24 hours on the basis of fatigue, because they were grateful to be able to tell the boss that they'd been directed to get the sleep they so desperately craved. And I always got particular satisfaction from the time I spent going through a work diary with a driver when I was told, nobody's ever explained it to me like that before. Because I knew at that point that this driver now had the knowledge to avoid those pitfalls in their work diary and that they were grateful for that knowledge. It's this kind of thing I meant when I told Rod that I missed interacting with truck drivers. Denial or argument from car drivers was more often than not the norm, around about 70% of interactions. But with truck drivers, denial or argument was rare, say about 10%. And for the 90% of other truck drivers, most issues were resolved by conversation. And I'd like to think that they came away from it all with strategies to help them avoid those things in the future. And that was what I always felt was the point of my job, to prevent. How and why I got to that point is probably best explained by giving you a bit of a background as to how I got into the Highway Patrol in the first place. When I first joined the New South Wales Police Force in 1987, all I knew was that I wanted to be a cop. I had a few ideas about where I wanted my career to go, but I decided not to commit until I had a better idea of what the job felt like. Eventually I landed at the Green Valley Police Station in southwest Sydney. And for those of you that know it now, it was vastly different back in those days. It was a busy station, made all the busier by having a crew of only 3 of us on each shift, including 2 part-time police rescue operators and a police rescue truck. The rescue area stretched from Blacktown to just north of Mittagong and from Penrith to Lakemba. Although I was only the only one of the 3 who wasn't rescue trained, I did attend almost every rescue job with the trained operators, and if the job was within our normal patrol area, I also got stuck with the investigation and paperwork. But attending virtually every serious road crash that happened in southwest Sydney whenever I was on duty had a big influence on my career path. There are only so many road crashes you can attend before your mind turns to how these crashes can be prevented. The catalyst for me was a crash that's always stayed with me, and whenever I see a Honda Prelude, I'm reminded of it. It occurred on a summer Sunday afternoon in Camden Valley Way at Catherine Field in 1988. Back then, Camden Valley Way was a narrow road with a single lane in each direction. And a family were out for a drive in Dad's new Honda Prelude, and they were heading north. And a young guy heading south with more than a few beers on board was speeding and overtaking. As he approached the Honda from the opposite direction, the rear of his Holden utility stepped sideways and into the path of the Honda. Because of the Honda's wedge shape and low front edge, the ute rode up over the bonnet on the driver's side, and the ute's rear axle penetrated the Honda's windscreen, hitting the driver in the head and killing him instantly. The crushed roof trapped the driver's wife and 2 small children in the Honda. Now, this family had gone from having a lovely family day out to being trapped in a car with their now dead father and husband. No doubt those few seconds changed the course of that family's life forever. But it also determined my career path. The desire to try to do something about road crashes before they happen was cemented in me. And this has always been and continues to be the force that motivated me in my work and now in my research. So in 1990, I transferred to the Highway Patrol at what was then called L District, which included both the St George and Sutherland Shires in Sydney. The Highway Patrol course was conducted at the Police Driver Training School, which was then at St Ives. And I think the police shulled that shortly afterwards because they realised the value of the land at St Ives that it was sitting on. But throughout the 5 weeks of driving and lectures, training around trucks was minimal. Essentially, I came out of it knowing what a truck looked like, and that was about it. It wasn't that I didn't want to deal with trucks, I just didn't have the knowledge or the confidence. So after 5 years of working in L District, I moved to the country, brought me here to Wagga Wagga, where I lived and worked for 15 years. Now, while the Sturt Highway runs through Wagga, our area of responsibility also included parts of the Hume, the Olympic and the Newell highways. So that meant that many capital city journeys up and down Australia's east coast or across the country came through our area, and that inevitably brought us into regular contact with long-distance truck drivers. It was about this time that I realised that the motoring world looks very different from the perspective of a truck driver. I still recall my first foray onto the Hume Highway in a Highway Patrol car. I was driving northbound through Tarcutta long before it was bypassed, and I decided to turn on the UHF, and that was a form of communication I hadn't had much to do with at that point. One of the first things I heard as I was following a B-double through the village was, double one on your back door and the double out of the cutter, windscreen southbound. I had no idea what that meant. But after listening in for a little longer, I worked out that I was in fact the double one, and it was me causing all this chatter. I decided at that point that I have to learn what seemed like a new language. Over the years, I got to the point where I could hold a conversation with a truck driver who thought he was actually speaking to another truck driver. Sort of like learning to speak Vietnamese and nailing it. But there was a serious side to it. It deepened my understanding of the world in which truck drivers live and allowed me to communicate to a far greater level. There were many instances where this communication ability worked well, both for myself, the truck drivers I was talking to, and the road using public. Police radio frequently broadcast keep a lookout for messages involving vehicles that were driving dangerously or wanted in connection with some offence. The easiest way to get a good scan of the road was to ask passing truck drivers. It wasn't unusual to successfully locate a wanted vehicle or remove a dangerous driver from the road purely because of the help we'd been given over the UHF by those truck drivers. And you can't do that with a car driver. In other examples, we'd sometimes have difficulty locating a car crash because the car had rolled off the road or into the bushes or down an embankment. From our low riding perspective, it was difficult to locate these scenes, particularly at night. Yet truck drivers riding high in their seats were often able to help us pinpoint these crash locations and get other emergency help straight to the site. And you can't do that with a car driver either. Often, if I wanted to stop a truck, I found it easier to simply ask the driver to pull up over the UHF somewhere. They knew their truck and knew where it was suitable to stop it, and I found this method always seemed to start things off on a positive footing. And when a car crash or other incident blocked the road, it was so much easier to keep truck drivers updated over the UHF. At these kinds of scenes, many car drivers would demand to know what was going on and how long the delay was going to be, because their need to get through was more important than anybody else's. But truck drivers would either work out their own diversion or make the best of the delay by having a rest. Very early in my time at Wagga Wagga, I realised I needed to learn more about trucks and the transport industry. So I completed a 2-day course at Goulburn Police Academy about trucks, but it really wasn't enough to help me deal with what I was seeing on the road. There were and still are some very knowledgeable and good highway patrol officers who have been dealing with this stuff for years. So I sought them out, as well as doing my own research and learning and getting trained in ECU downloads and load restraint, and I did some tertiary study as well. But the constantly changing transport industry environment meant that the learning never stopped. By working with other knowledgeable police and other agencies such as the RMS, as it was until recently, I continued to build and share my knowledge amongst many less experienced highway patrol police who were still encountering the same lack of training about truck laws and the transport industry. And that situation is also mirrored across Europe. Many of the city-based police I worked with when I returned to Sydney avoided dealing with trucks because they lacked knowledge and confidence, and they didn't want that to be shown up in front of a truck driver. But by guiding them through the technical and legal minefield that is transport industry enforcement, their interest in doing it properly was sparked. By the time I left the police, I felt that I'd built a reasonable level of knowledge, and that by sharing it with other police, I hope I've left some of that knowledge behind. So what is it that motivates a highway patrol officer to stop a particular truck? Well, frequently and quite reasonably, we'd get asked by a driver why we stopped the truck. Sometimes it's because of the manner in which the vehicle's being driven. Other times it's just a random inspection. Sometimes it's because we had concerns about the condition of the load, such as an overloaded skip bin, unrestrained barrels, loose webbing strap, or a curtain bulging outwards. Other times it's because there's something indicating there's something not right with the vehicle. Often little issues revealed bigger issues after we stopped it. Sometimes the conditions in which some drivers were being forced to work was an absolute disgrace, such as a collapsed seat that the driver had packed with a beach towel to stop the spring sticking into him, or a seatbelt that didn't work, or brakes that didn't work, or suspension that had collapsed. Overwhelmingly, these truck drivers were happy to present the boss with a defect notice so that they didn't have to drive a truck that probably wouldn't have met third world standards. There were also many occasions when drivers initiated their own stop over the UHF or by voluntarily pulling into an RBT or inspection site. This might involve anonymously passing on information about a bad company practice that could support an audit, or issuing a defect notice to fix the things on the truck that the boss had been refusing to fix. Not only was I pleased at the trust these drivers had placed in me, but I also hoped that these interactions had reduced some of the stresses these drivers were under. Given my motivation for joining the Highway Patrol to prevent road crashes, I ended up employing a 2-stage process to help me consider what action I'd take at the roadside. First, as I gained more knowledge and experience, I prioritised my responses based on a link between a law and safety or mobility. I made sure I understood any safety or mobility links so that I could explain it and justify it. If I couldn't find that link, it didn't mean that I ignored that law, but it just became a lower priority. To use some real examples, apart from the obvious safety links such as speeding, drink driving, drug driving or using a mobile phone, there are many other issues an enforcement officer can look for that have a direct safety link, such as a ute with dangerously modified suspension, or a car with wheels that are too big and tyres that are too small, a ute carrying far too much weight, a car towing an insecure load that was also too heavy, a ute with a load that was dangerously insecure, or something we used to see frequently, a truck with a 4.5 tonne GVM, the driver of which thought that meant they could carry 4.5 tonnes. And just for the record, that one topped out at 7.5 tonnes. Cases like this that risk a road crash that could result in anything from a non-injury crash to a fatality make it easier to find that safety or mobility link, or both. Even if there's no crash, a load loss or a breakdown on a major road, particularly around Sydney, means traffic delays and disruption for many people. I frequently engage with the drivers of vehicles like these, who put the safety and mobility of everyone around them at risk, like those heading to work or to their own small business, truck drivers doing local or long-haul work, people heading to medical appointments or to hospital for life-saving surgery, or people on their way to the airport for the holiday of a lifetime. Certainly, however, there are some times when a driver's best efforts can't foresee everything. Like when one of your cattle decides to get in with the sheep. While this was clearly beyond the driver's control, we did participate in the challenge of helping him find somewhere he could offload the stock so he could restore order to it. The second stage of the process was how to deal with the driver, and this applies whether it's in a car or a truck. Remembering that my main aim was always to prevent the situation from happening again. Many things influenced my decision-making process, not least of which was the attitude and demeanour of the driver. At the outset, I can confirm that being subject to abuse, foul language or violent threats is not part of anyone's job, whether it's the police officer, the enforcement officer or the truck driver. The small percentage of drivers that start off with abuse likely end up with a different outcome than they otherwise would have if a civil conversation had occurred. The reason being that it's impossible to educate or explain things to someone who refuses to listen. Hence, in those abusive situations, the options available to influence someone's behaviour diminish, invariably resulting in the issue of a fine or fines rather than a conversation. But with 90% of truck drivers, the educational part of my interactions was something I really enjoyed. And it wasn't just me that was doing the educating. It was through these two-way conversations that I learnt so much about the kind of things that affect the decisions drivers make on the road. If I told the driver that the way to comply with the law is to do X, the driver might tell me that it's impossible to do X because the boss told him to do Y. And if he doesn't do Y, the boss either doesn't pay him for that job, doesn't pay him at all, or sacks him. In those circumstances, a compromise was reached, which might involve a fine for something the driver could control, and or a number of warnings, some advice regarding how to avoid these issues in the future, and often some good intelligence for us about how the company was operating in regard to compliance with their legal obligations. When I look back at my career, I realised there was a time when I lacked any understanding of why some truck drivers did the things I saw them do. This lack of understanding meant that my actions at the time weren't always an effective response to the situation. But over the years, I was able to develop a much greater appreciation of the things that motivate truck drivers' behaviour. And that appreciation came from the conversations I had with truck drivers on the road. By taking a bit more time with these drivers, I gained a deeper understanding of what motivated them and the pressures they were under. These conversations opened up a whole new world of issues in the lives of truck drivers that I hadn't realised before. I thought about how driving for a living changes the deterrence dynamic that a lot of behavioural road safety countermeasures are built upon. While a car driver might lose their licence, they can generally still go to work and earn a living. But I recognise that what happens on the road for a truck driver sometimes equates to whether they can earn a living or not. And it frequently equates to how much pay is taken home to pay the mortgage, the school fees, the living expenses, to look after the family, and in the case of owner drivers or small operators, to pay off their truck, pay their employees, pay for maintenance, insurance and all the other business expenses and taxes they have to pay. There's a bit of conversation on this in the morning, but when I hear about truck crashes in the media, my thoughts immediately turn to all of the circumstances that led to the crash. What sort of pressure was the driver under? Who put that pressure on him or her? Was the road a contributing factor? Was there an issue with the truck? What was the weather like? What were the other drivers involved doing immediately prior to the crash? It should be heartening in the road safety field. It's becoming increasingly recognised that there are gaps in crash investigation skills and practices, such as the general tendency to look only for the last action of the driver immediately before the crash, kind of like only looking for the final straw. From a scientific perspective, this is seen as a lost opportunity to collect detailed data about the many factors that contribute to a crash. Ideally, improved crash investigation would mean that all of the circumstances that contributed to the crash are investigated and identified, and responsibility could be shared, and countermeasures could be determined and implemented so that, to borrow the saying about the straw that broke the camel's back, all of the straws, and not just the last one, are taken off the back of the camel. This might mean that crash investigation could look something like the investigations conducted after a plane crash. I've never heard a media report describing that the pilot crashed the plane, nor should we be hearing reports that say the truck driver crashed the truck, without reference to all of the contributing factors. Enforcing road transport law by going up the chain is no simple task. The complexity and time required to investigate others in the chain of responsibility doesn't provide the quick result that some enforcement organisations prefer. However, regardless of the complexity and elongated outcome, going up the chain was a job that I gained great satisfaction from. The circumstances that give rise to truck drivers' behaviour won't change if little pressure is brought to bear on others in the chain of responsibility. And I hope that those up the chain who were the subject to my actions are at least now more conscious of their own responsibilities. At the beginning of 2022, I started my studies towards a Doctor of Philosophy degree. When I looked up the word philosopher, it came back as essentially someone who thinks about things. Now, while I'll be doing my thinking fully clothed, my philosophy doctorate means that I'll be thinking about truck drivers, the environment they operate in, and the things that influence what truck drivers do. It's an extension of the thinking I've been doing for years. Statistics, research and transport industry organisations all tell us that truck driver fatigue is still recognised as a major issue for the Australian transport industry, where it remains the single largest factor in truck driver deaths and a key risk to safety. Remembering that truck drivers are the last link in the chain and the ones bearing the highest risk, the main aim of my research is to understand from a truck driver's perspective the things that influence truck drivers' beliefs, attitudes and behaviour regarding truck driver fatigue. Academics can conduct research and provide policy options. Politicians can create the rules and laws. Bureaucrats can deliver it. And transport company managers can build guidelines around it. But it's truck drivers that experience it at the street level. I used to hear almost every day about the things that affect drivers, what motivates them to comply, and the challenges they face regarding compliance. And because of this, I respect and appreciate the depth of knowledge and experience they have. While I also intend to interview company managers and law enforcement officers, the people I really need to help me dig deeply into the kinds of things that influence truck drivers are truck drivers. My plan, once I have approval from my University Ethics Committee, is to approach organisations such as the NRFA to ask for assistance in reaching out to truck drivers and managers who might be interested in assisting me by participating in an interview as part of my research. So when I get to that point, I'll be asking for your help. But in asking for that help, I'd also like to emphasise that I am no longer a police officer. I'm a university student. So whatever's discussed will and must remain confidential, because if it's not, I risk 4 years of my life's work going down the drain. So I can give you that guarantee. What I hope to discover from my research is not only what works for truck drivers, but why it works. and not only what doesn't work for truck drivers, but why it doesn't work. From this, I hope to be able to identify contrasts between what I learn in the interviews and existing strategies, which I hope will lead to the identification of policy and practice concepts that can work better for truck drivers, for their families, for their colleagues, and for everybody we all share the road with. So once again, it's about prevention. I hope that what I've discussed today has provided a different perspective of the Highway Patrol from the perspective of a former Highway Patrol officer, and that you have some insight into the influences on enforcement officers and why they might do what they do. Perhaps some truck drivers see their relationship with enforcement officers as adversarial, a struggle for supremacy of one over the other. But from a personal level, adversarial isn't how I saw it. And the longer I spent doing the job, the more I came to understand about the drivers I was interacting with. I'm grateful to the transport industry and those that work in it for allowing me to learn so much about it. Even though I worked amongst it for over 30 years, I never stopped learning. I always gained satisfaction from learning about how transport policy affected drivers at the front line. I never stopped enjoying the conversations I had with drivers and operators about compliance and safety issues. I never stopped enjoying a handshake and a thank you from drivers who appreciated learning something that no one had shown them before. I never stopped appreciating the assistance from truck drivers when we were looking for a crash scene or a wanted vehicle, or their patience when the road was blocked because of some kind of incident. I never stopped enjoying helping drivers who had been trying to get the boss to fix defects on their truck, or drawing attention to companies about whom drivers shared insights regarding compliance and non-compliance and unreasonable pressures being put on them. When I left the police, I knew that my interactions with truck drivers would be one of the things that I missed the most. But through my research project, I look forward to getting back to interacting with and learning from the transport industry. Thank you.
A few questions.
The fray.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I'm just wondering, thank you for your speech, it was terrific, and thank you for the care of our people on the road for so long. Are you by any chance involved in any sort of training of officers coming along now?
Not at the moment, but it was a big thing for me prior to leaving. One of the sections that I got involved in when I went back to Sydney from Wagga was a specific heavy vehicle unit, and that unit recognised that there was a lack of training and experience, because you can put people in a classroom for 4 or 5 days, but unless they go out and practice it, they don't build the confidence, they don't build the knowledge, they don't build the practice. A lot of them, particularly with a lot of the heavy vehicle national law stuff, would struggle to put a brief together because of all of the points that have got to be addressed in order to present a successful brief to a magistrate. One of the other things that I tried to teach them is if they're looking at a work diary and there's 100 things wrong with it, some big things, some little things, you don't need to lay 100 charges. There was a particular protocol that I used to use called the Hamsey protocol, and what that meant, it came about, it was a higher court decision where a fraudster was put before the court for 100 frauds. But rather than laying 100 individual charges, they laid one charge with an indictment that read that the accused did, on 100 occasions, commit fraud. Right, now, I used to use that frequently because if, for example, a truck driver had failed to add up the hours, and that had occurred, I used to use like a 1, 2, 3 principle. 1's a mistake, 2's an oversight, 3's probably something we need to pay attention to. But if that truck driver had maybe done that 80 times, I didn't lay 80 charges, I laid one charge saying that the accused did on 80 occasions between this date and this date failed to total the hours. So I used to use that fairly frequently, but that's not something that a junior constable would be able to pick up on day one. It takes years and years and years. And like I said, I was doing this for over 30 years and I never stopped learning. So we can't expect, even if we improve the standard of training to a national standard level, we can't expect the people that have just finished that training to have 30 years of knowledge and experience. I certainly recognise it's an issue. When I finish this PhD, that is certainly something I would like to look at. But there's a lot more involved in a PhD than I originally thought, so it's keeping me quite busy at the moment. So, yeah.
So I have two questions for you.
Yep.
The first one is, how do we then change the attitude of the people doing the wrong thing in the highway patrol? So you said your interactions were mostly good. There's a few like had a bad day. Your blokes are entitled to have a bad day as well.
Yep.
But those that go out there and hammer us and mean that we lose drivers and things, is there something we can do there? And the second question is, with your research, how much of this is being done? Like, you know, we've got our industry associations, we've got others that you would like to think would do this sort of research to help us. And I'm sure Sal's really interested in any sort of research that can be put forward to promote a case for better safety, no matter who it comes from or how it's done. But geez, you know, why haven't we done some of this stuff before? And it's really good to see that you're doing it from that point of view.
Yeah, look, I'll answer your second question first. When you put a research proposal together, one of the key things is you've got to identify a gap in the literature. So I can guarantee, or at least the people who said I can do this, also accept that this hasn't been done before. One of the things that I'm told is unique is that when people approach a PhD about a topic, they don't usually come at it with 30 plus years of experience and practice. So that is what I think will make my approach and my research different to anything that's been done before. Although my principal supervisor keeps telling me I've got to take off my practitioner's hat and put on my researcher's hat, because the idea is that I can't go into it with any preconceived ideas, I can still use my knowledge and experience to sort of head off other issues. As far as your first question, training the Highway Patrol to do the right thing. One of the things that has long since frustrated me is, and I don't know if anybody was planning on asking a question about a quota, okay? In 34 years, I was never pressured, never told anything about how many tickets I had to issue, all right? The quota thing is ultimately a myth, at least in New South Wales. However, where I think it gets its legs is that, and I don't just blame the police, I blame a lot of other enforcement organisations. Think about the media reports over a long weekend, Easter or Christmas or whatever, okay? We don't necessarily hear about how many crashes there's been this year as opposed to last year. Sometimes we do, but generally the focus isn't on that. The focus is on how many breath tests have been done, how many speeding tickets have been given, how many seatbelt tickets, how many mobile phones, all that sort of stuff. So it creates an environment where numbers are the objective, okay? As far as the Highway Patrol is concerned, the performance evaluation is something that influences what they do. It's not a quota, but it influences what they do. So you will have guys that will go out there and, you know, issue a whole heap of minor stuff because it gives them a number. And at the end of the day, their bosses, who probably don't know much better than them about how to evaluate the performance of the Highway Patrol, think that the guy who sat off the stop sign with the overhanging branch that no one can see the stop sign and gives out 30 tickets a day is doing a much better job than the guy who stops 2 trucks and spends 2 hours with each truck driver going through everything and explaining and educating to the truck driver. I have my own opinion on that, and I think, you know, which I think is the more effective, but getting around that, like part of changing the culture of the way the Highway Patrol approach with any motorist, not just truck drivers, is getting around that performance evaluation that suggests numbers are the way to go. And that's going to take a long-term cultural change, and it will need to engage senior levels of the police. I think when we had the conversation a few months ago, I made mention of the fact that one of the challenges that we had, and I can say this now because I'm not a member of the police service and I'm not restricted by what I can say, the challenge was having people in charge who knew what the task under them was. And at the time I left, the people who were in charge of the highway patrol were detectives. Right? They'd never sat their bum in a highway car. Wouldn't know the front of a truck from the back of it. When you've got a situation like that, I mean, there's a place for the detectives in policing organisations, but it's not in the highway patrol. When you've got a situation like that, where people up top don't know what the task is, they look for the easiest performance measure, and numbers are king. So when we can get policing organisations to get their head around that, I think we'll make some progress in regards to educating the police that numbers aren't king. You can actually take the time to speak to these drivers and educate them, and perhaps take the same approach that salespeople are.
A long-term project then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Greg, thanks for that. A couple of funnies. Western Sydney University changed its name recently from University of Western Sydney, became Western Sydney University, and a lot of the international students dropped out because they thought they were going to get indoctrinated with Western culture and philosophy. This is for real.
There you go. I didn't know that.
The Chinese students actually thought they were going to be indoctrinated with Western politics. So anyhow, some things aren't well thought through. They're also a great university because they vetoed me doing my PhD by publication with them.
Okay.
So I went offshore. Anyhow, I've mentioned to various people, I said, look, the fatal crashes basically are not just the tip of the iceberg, they are literally the pinhead on the iceberg. 270. One of the insurers that I deal with, and many of you heard about as one of the sponsors today, basically, their database for 6 years had 172,000 truck claims. You don't hear of that in the press.
No.
Yeah, you hear the fatals, you may hear a bit of the serious injuries, and some of the classifications of those are a bit wobbly as well. Right? There is this, people say, Rod said, haven't learned enough about the industry. We know so little about the industry, especially the non-hire and award side. We have no idea how many fatals they have. We have no idea of the kilometres they travel. Basically, we only have a vague idea of the age of the trucks, basically there. But even the major crashes around, which I think is around about between 4,000 and 5,000 a year, there'd be police reports on about 30% of those.
Yep.
Pushing it. Really. Unless someone's hurt, unless someone's killed, often there's not a report. And I mentioned to Sal earlier that there was one jurisdiction recently in one of the big studies we're doing. Unless someone gets hurt or injured and it's a property and insurance problem, we don't care.
Yep.
And yet, here is one of the large insurers who has probably only got about 30% of its own market, plus none of the ancillary sector, which is 58% of the trucks, which people don't realise, and certainly politicians don't realise. They think every truck that moves basically is, on a freight rate, whereas that's not true, by a long shot, right? Was that there is an enormous number of stories out there that needs to be burrowed down.
Yep.
The mere fact you have one insurer in 6 years with an average of almost 30,000 claims a year, and we hear about 170 to 200 fatalities. There is an untold story there, and if anyone thinks there aren't lots of research and holes to be dug, and one of the reasons, as much as people respond to fatals, is that a lot of the academics research, that's the only data they got.
Yep.
And they were killed. The question is, keep digging, absolutely, go for it.
Just on that point that you're making, it's clear that there are big gaps in the skills of people who investigate crashes, not just truck crashes, but any crash. If it's a fatality or a serious injury, then that's when the crash investigation experts turn up, and even to an extent, not a lot of them have got much of a clue about heavy vehicle national law and chain of responsibility and all that sort of stuff. But if it's just a non-fatal crash or a non-injury crash, it's just the general duties police that turn up. And it might be a constable who's been in the job 5 minutes, or it could be a constable who's been in the job 5 years. So the quality of those investigations means that we're missing out on collecting a lot of data that could be really useful in telling the story of the true situation. So, yeah.
Well, look, it's 4:30. We're supposed to be going for happy hour. And I don't know about the rest of you.
Mine's just more of a comment with when you do it with that. We used to attend a lot of crashes as well, and quite a few of those were just misreported. They just tick the box for fatigue. Rather than do a bit of investigation, I had several times where I spoke to the drivers after and they said, look, I just said I didn't know what happened because I didn't want to get a neg drive. So they just said, yeah, right, I broke there was fatigue and all that sort of stuff. And then I did some bit of time in road safety, and then they use all those stats to make all their decisions. So they're 5-year-old stats, but that's all their decision making for the next 5 years.
Yep.
And that's where
Sounds just nodding away.
Yeah. And that
work diary rules came in about because of the higher fatigue.
Yep. And that certainly is one of the issues, the time lag between when the data is collected and when it becomes available for use. Quite often it's obsolete by the time it's available to look at.
Just a quick one.
Yep.
You were looking after the Hume Dam way back in the 90s, were you?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, in your opinion, the crashes that happened with heavy vehicles, was it speed or fatigue? What do you think? What's your point? Back when it was single road?
Back when it was single road, I think it was a mixture of everything, really. Certainly, speed was a factor. Back in the days when people were pumping up the trucks, I think the quickest truck I ever got on radar was 152.
I was going to say, what was the record?
Yeah, 152. Although I did look at a work diary one time that a guy had reworked, and in order for him to get from point A to point B, if that work diary entry was accurate, he would have had to do 2,250 kilometres an hour. So it was quite easy to convince the magistrate that yes, that is a false entry. But in reality, yeah, 152 was the quickest I've seen. But we used to find Sunday nights were the special night. And anything 145 to 150 was pretty common back in the day. I understand from colleagues that are still around here now that those speeds are less prevalent. Back in the day, to answer your question, I think it was a mixture of fatigue, particularly on a Sunday night, because what we found was that there was a pattern where Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the drivers had spent some time sleeping the night before. Sunday, quite frequently, they'd be watching the football or at the family barbecue or whatever, and wouldn't, for a range of reasons, some of which are quite legitimate and reasonable, wouldn't prepare themselves adequately for the journey that they've got to drive overnight. So, yeah, mixture of both.
Stuck for a word. So we're going to get Senator Sterle, because he's got to go back to Canberra. He won't be able to stay and have beers with us tonight because we're a bad influence on him. And Mum's going to take him home to Canberra, so... Oh, sorry, Ruth, I didn't see you.
I said that I would have got my block knocked off. Paul, my apologies, mate. I'm being sooky because I don't have a rhubarb and it's not my part of the world, but I've got to go back to work tomorrow morning. But anyway, thanks, Mike. Look, can I just, I led in today talking about the Senate inquiry. The question, I think, came from Gordon. I think you started it, mate. I can't remember who started. Mark might have. But quite clearly, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking to John Graham yesterday. Thank goodness John gave me the opportunity, James Graham, I should apologise, from Big Rigs, who gave me the opportunity to respond that there's some secret document that's been leaked out that Labor wants to set some form of standards and call it the RSRT. I think most of you have seen that. I'm not going to waste my breath and keep going along those lines. You've all heard me so many times say that what we want to do. You've all heard me say we're not going to do anything unless we consult. So go back to the Senate inquiry, and and as I said early on, the wheels of the machinery of government moves so slowly. My goodness me, doesn't it what? But anyway, cut long story short, where are we? I'm very happy to say, so you are all very clear, and I'm happy to take any questions, that the main part of the inquiry, certainly in my opinion, not only from my own background, my own experiences and my own drive and wanting to see a better industry for those that are still in it, But also, let us not forget, this came from a Senate inquiry. It came from an inquiry where there was 100-odd submissions. I'm proud to say the majority of the witnesses, and we took, as you all know, I travelled the country most of the time, a lot of the time on my own. Unfortunately, other senators couldn't get there because of COVID. To go out of my way to make sure that I listened to drivers. Now there were, thanks Mike, mate. There were educators, there was transport associations, there were transport employers, there were training advocates, there were experts in the field of law, but predominantly transport operators, owner drivers and truck drivers. And for that, I couldn't have wished for a better spread of information that I could compile a report. It highlighted everything that I did know, and I got a few other things along the way that I put my name to, and I stole one of them off my old mate sitting over here, keeping the eye on things running at the time, was extending the cabs to try and get some form of comfort for our drivers. Not missed on me, mate, not missed, and you know that. And I did say to Mike, I'm pinching your lines, mate. But I also did clarify in the media, it wasn't my idea, I wish it was, and it was all his and I grabbed it. But, excuse me, the first couple of references go clearly to the most topical in our industry. It is rates. And as you've heard me said here, there is a myriad of dramas, challenges, speed humps, all sorts of stuff in our industry that makes it great, but it keeps us there. Not one is any more important than the other. But in my humble opinion, after 46 years in this industry and still on the preface, on the outskirts of the industry, still playing with trucks now and again, and Yogi, you can't wait to have a crack at me. And I don't blame you, because yes, mate, I am enjoying myself out there. It's all charity, but I'm loving it, and you know that, mate. But it is a return on investment. And one thing I've been very, very clear, and I take this to heart, I have said from day one, this is not a blue between the driver and the employer. This is not a blue between the owner driver and the employer, the contractor, the transport company. This is an industry issue where we, regardless of your title, have to be remunerated. It's pretty simple. It's not hard. I can shut my eyes and I can stand here and I'll rattle off all the same lines I've been using since I actually got involved. I started in the transport industry at the age of 17, permanently. I'm now 63. I was an owner driver at 20, as most of you know. All the problems are the same. The only difference in WA, we'd never heard of fatigue management. Oh no, I rephrased that. No, we didn't know what fatigue management was. We didn't have regulated driving hours, and there was no such thing as PBS. All the same challenges were all the same ones we were having back then. Rates, payment times, can't get drivers. There's more clowns out there that don't know what they're doing, and yet they get a licence, and all sorts of stuff. Some so-and-so goes broke, starts up the next day under a new name. All the Kenworths are all the same. All got the same numbers on them, and they all happen to be white. So I'm making it very clear that I was disappointed, bitterly disappointed, to all of a sudden read articles in Owner Driver that the ALP's got a secret agenda. There was never any hidden agenda. There was always, the agenda was, how do we get reward for our effort? I've said it so many times in every function that I've addressed my thoughts about the old RSRT. I can't say it enough. Nothing's going to happen unless we have consultation with industry. And with the greatest of respect, we have to have the suits and ties from the transport associations, because they've got a role to play. Because their members have the same challenges as our owner drivers and our drivers. And let's not forget, it's not just truckies, for crying out loud. We're talking forkies, loaders, receival staff, admin, sales, tyre fitters. It just goes on. There's thousands and thousands of us reliant upon the supply chain. So when I sit there and see, oh me, when I go to a bar of this, and I think, oh, and the livestock is, and I've responded to it, and I'd say the same. I've spoken with Matt Munro on a couple of occasions, and they've said very clearly to me they don't agree with the RSRT. I said, neither do I. And they said, but whatever happens, we want to be at the table. I want to be at the table. But I'm proud to say one thing. I sincerely take, with the greatest of appreciation, the arm of friendship that's been extended to me by the NRFA. And I sincerely say here now, proudly, that I've done everything I can to make sure that the NRFA are one of the representative bodies on whatever body that will be, discussing whatever it's going to be in terms of enforceable standards with the federal government. And I think that I can honestly say that, you know, it's a bit harder for you guys, the challenge. You don't have the resources to get people to Canberra. But when Rod comes down, or when Gordo was coming down before Rod, how proud you did your membership to be there. Now, you are one part of the supply chain. You're one part of the representative forces of the transport industry, but you're an integral part. And I will continue to do everything I can to make sure the NRFA are at the table for every single discussion we have. And I can't go any more than saying you came to the fore when the inquiry was on. You came to the fore in every state. The NRFA was represented, except WA, I think. I think that would be right, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that'd be right.
Yep. And I made sure that you guys were there because I wanted to hear from drivers and owner-drivers. So this nonsense about some secret agenda that we've got that we took to the ALP, I took it to the ALP National Conference, as I told you, in 2018, saying we want enforceable standards. And as I said very, very clearly, and I cannot say this enough, what you as an operator, whether you have 1,000 trucks or whether you have one truck, whatever you charge to move, whatever it is from point A to point B, is of no business of mine. But if someone thinks they're going to take it out of the hide of another transport company, or an owner-driver, or a driver, then it is our business. And I've not hidden that. And I know more than anyone else that companies tender on contracts a little bit cheaper here because there's a little bit more cream there. I get all that, not a problem. But the problem I do have is when that flea bag that does that quote then drives out the yard in the latest BMW while the drivers haven't had their superannuation or the subby's been screwed, I've got a problem. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Mike, but going on to where are we now, it is under the remit of Minister Tony Burke. As I said, Rod, you are my witness, and you sat there, Rod, and proudly you stated you were the only driver. Well, you had a part-time driver sitting next to you too, Cobbers, and don't leave me out of there. But you're right, you're the only one that was a driver because you're the only grassroots driver representative organisation apart from the TWU. But the TWU didn't have drivers there, they had their officials there because they have the ability to finance and the resources available to them to be able to do that. And I know it's an impulse, Rod, and if you have a predecessor that takes your place, your predecessor will always be sitting next to me, mate. I'll make sure of that. So let's not get all downjected. Let's not get all, oh my God, it's all going to crap again. Because there's one man representing all these blue shirts and all these non-blue shirts and all these small family businesses that's going to have his say. And when the lion roars in Canberra, let me tell you, they'll be heard. And everything in Canberra has always been a job of numbers. And that's why I'm very, very proud to say. This time 3 years ago, NR who? Seriously, in the halls of Canberra, who? Well, they now know who you are. And it's now incumbent upon you, and I don't want to sound like I'm preaching to you, to get behind your representatives and make sure they are supported. Because I've got to tell you, there's only 2 owner drivers, or one ex-owner driver and another driver, that's going to be making sure that we've got the, and I'll say this for the TW pushing as well, for their representatives as well, that we will be doing our best. So in terms of the Senate inquiry, they're the first 3 items, first 3 recommendations, I think, Mike. As I said quietly, without all the fanfare, we've kicked off the conversations about training, Kim, which you're well aware of too, and the, excuse me, and the accreditation, and not the accreditation, what's the word? I've gone blank, mate. You got to have the skills, Mike, that you reckon you didn't have, or what was it? Competencies, thanks.
Competencies.
Mind you, he's driven one of those big bastards up there. I haven't yet, but I was invited to do it, but I wimped out. Excuse me, but I will get there. But I'm happy to take any questions if that makes it any easier. The other 7 recommendations, or 6 recommendations, apart from the training and skills and accreditation, they're a work in process. They're all under Minister King, Catherine King. But I will like to take the chance to say this. I'm so blessed to have Senator Carol Brown in the position that she got, because not only is she really locked into this, because she's even got Ruth to have to leave Canberra to come today, because Carol had a commitment that she had to do in another part of Australia. I'm not sure where she is, but she is fair dinkum locked onto the road transport industry and its members and its constituency, and I'm blessed to have her as my partner, or me working closely with Carol and of course with Ruth. And for a chief of staff to come out to Wagga for the day, good on you, Ruth. She kept commenting on my driving, but I told her it was a shit road out there, regardless of the local member who didn't think it was all that rain that did it. But anyway, I apologise because I didn't realise rain had ruined that road. coming in. So, Mike, any questions? Well, that's it. I'm off. And I would like to say, no, trust me.
When I started off, as you stated about the NRFA not having the resources to sort of get the most of the events, is there any chance the government wants to throw us $200 million?
Oh, mate. Oh, look, you've flushed me out, Adam. There's no doubt about you. I sat with the minister a couple of weeks ago and I said, as an ex-union delegate at Ansett Ridgeway as a union organiser for 14 years, I've got to put the case up for these poor buggers to get paid. What's the expression about pushing something uphill with a sharp stick? Okay, mate, in terms of wages and that, no, can't. Sorry, mate, tried my best. But I know that, look, I must say, I know that there's been a bit of money thrown into the GoFundMe campaign, which I think that's a fantastic thing. That's great.
Well, if I could just say,
sure, mate.
If I could just jump in on that. There's a glass of water under there, mate. I don't want you to choke.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
You've still got to sign the cheque, all right?
Sure.
When the conversation was had about sending driver representatives to the steering committee, we decided as a group, the NRFA at the time, to start a GoFundMe. And we're going to push that again very, very shortly. But I made a phone call to Michael Caine, and obviously there's a hell of a lot Michael and I could disagree on. But I explained to him what was happening, I explained why it was happening, and the TWU tipped $5,000 in to help cover some driver expenses over and above what was it. So thank you to the TWU for that, because it does show, we've all said, I've certainly said myself, that the TWU sometimes seems as though they're missing in action when it comes to long distance drivers. Rest areas is an issue that they want to get behind and help with, and as I say publicly, I thank Michael Caine for doing that. There are other people too. Mark Parry tipped in some money from Pinnamoors, and there are other people that have sort of come to the party to help out. And I would encourage anyone to get onto your network and try and help fund the guys that aren't going to be paid to be there. They're going to get their expenses reimbursed, as they should, but the wages and things like that, we all know, sometimes if the wheels aren't turning, you're not making a quid. We've all got to put roofs over our heads and feed the kids and all that sort of stuff. People have to be compensated to go. Thanks very much.
Yeah, good. Well done, mate. Thanks.
Got a question up here. Glenn. Yeah, Andy.
Oh, hi, Andy. Yeah, mate.
Fundamentally, I don't think anyone's got an issue with everyone being rewarded properly. But how you're ever going to get to there, I don't know.
I'm sorry, mate. I can hardly hear you, Andy.
There's that many variables in our industries, whether it's dirt roads, rigid trucks, motorised trucks, PBS trucks. I just don't know how you're ever going to get to some rates or
enforceable standards.
It's a big job in front of you, and we don't want any collateral damage here, but it's going to hurt some industries.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Andy, because I've got my views. Unfortunately, I won't be the one sitting there doing it the world according to me. That's the whole work of the whoever is going to be that committee, whoever's going to be that task force, that working group, whatever it is. And I don't have to sit here and tell you how to suck eggs, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out in this industry. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that will not send this nation broke. You all know what it is. I've got my own views. If I say my views, please, they're not the views of the government. Hey, it'd be nice getting paid. What did I put? Cash on delivery is a fantastic thing in my recommendations, knowing that ain't going to work, but I'm the old school. But this bullshit 45, 60, 90 days, I know I'm not going to mention the Japanese beer company. Did I say? Well, what are they? Anyway, 150 days. This is criminal. So there's payment terms. I'm sure that amongst you, I'm sure your representatives, if it be Rod or it be an owner driver or one of your committee members, I'm sure you will have what you want to see discussed, as I know that whoever is from the NRFA will be coming back to your committee meetings reporting back. That's how they work. I have got a great plan. It's all easy. Let's just get a couple of cartons of beer. We'll sort it out. 10 o'clock tonight we sign off. But I'm a loner on that one, Andy. It cannot be how it was before. Pretty simple.
Just on that, I came up with a bit of an idea a while back which we floated exactly that. Now, everyone said, rightfully so, there's so many different sides to the industry that you can't just one size does not fit all, and anyone with half brain recognises that. One thing I came up with and suggested, and we sort of floated it, and it did hit the media, and it's probably been a little bit forgotten about, but it was So there was a few parts to it. You can make up your base rate, so you can cut Australia into different areas. So obviously running up the east coast between Brisbane and Melbourne is pretty much going to cost you the same no matter what. If you're running across the Tanami Desert, obviously that's not going to cut it. So they stay out of that. Now whether there's even a need to touch the bloke in the Tanami, because he's probably got his business well sorted out. There's not too many people competing for that work, and he's probably doesn't need touching. And that's pretty much how the stockies feel. They don't want to be touched. That's great. We've got to sort it out. Awesome. But my theory was that take the east coast, right? If you're on that east coast, and you can pretty much do it geographically. You're all smart within 500 kilometres of the coastline. We have a base rate of $2 a kilometre for a single trailer, right? Based on $1 a litre for fuel. We burn 2 litres, we get about 2 kilometres per litre. So every time fuel goes up 1 cent, we add half a cent to that kilometre rate. So at the moment you're paying, let's just say $2 a litre. So there's another 50 cents on top of that has gone on. Now, these are only figures I'm throwing out there, right? That's a geographical way of doing it. And there's the actual equation. I don't know how we do that, but that was my sort of thought. What you can come up with something like that. Now, obviously, you can have another geographical location which might be running up the centre, and it has another equation that you need to do. But I think there's ways of doing it, and we've got enough smart people that we could do it. And I think it's certainly worth it.
Gordo, they are deliberations for your membership, mate. With the greatest respect, I encourage you to have them when I'm not in the room, so I can't be accused of any bias. And I also say that, and I just got to, Andy, sorry mate, I was too busy having a cough to actually think, but you see, also, I make no secret, I have a hatred of kilometre rate. There's no secret, I've always had that hatred, but I know drivers who are on kilometre rates who are making great money. I get that. So you can't just say, all kilometre rates crap. I really have a serious problem in this nation that truck drivers can sit. I don't care if you're sitting at the port, or you're sitting at Coles, or you're sitting at Metcash. How you're not getting paid. And let's go one step further. If you're a company driver, your company's not getting paid. So these are the things. It's not the driver versus the boss sort of stuff. This is us as an industry. This is us putting our machine guns out there. Leave them out there. Forget all the old crap arguments that we had for years and years and years. Get on and work on what unites us and doesn't divide us.
Question. Another question for the Senator?
Now I'm really off. Can I, Mike, this is getting easier all the time, and geez, I wish I could do the TW like this. Can I just say, Mike, I would love nothing better, mate, and the city tonight, and especially happy hour, because happy hour with the NRFA, I've never seen so many gears change and so much freight moved. And by the time the dinner came, the gearboxes got bigger.
That's right.
The freight got bigger.
That's right.
And I've got to tell you, mate, it saddens me, but I've got to go back to work.
You're leading that conversation too, Glenn, don't forget.
Big pardon?
You're leading the freight getting bigger.
That's what I mean. It's all coming from me. Mike, thank you, brother. Take care, mate. Right. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for being
Righto, so we'll get Paul to come up and do his bit now. Thanks very much for your indulgence there. The Senator does have to go back to Canberra. I was supposed to go and have a drive with him and do one of these charity runs, but there's a bridge not at Fitzroy Crossing anymore, and I don't feel like the 12,000k detour. And I don't know, in case any of you aren't aware, I haven't been behind the wheel for about a month, and my long-suffering partner's driving me around at the moment because I've wrecked my shoulder. So it's a bit of a problem. But so I won't be going up to Fitzroy with you.